start by handing over to our chair for today's panel discussion. Over to you, Ting.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to chair today's session. We will start with an academic overview of the framework of global manufacturing networks, and then we will have the panel to discuss 3 areas. For those who are new to Crayfish, our full name actually is crayfish.io, as the foundation of our core business is actually a digital platform facilitating cross-border trade and investment links, but with a focus on China. So our mission is to facilitate cross-border transactions powered by technology. And we do this through 3 ways. We offer the expertise through our global network to all companies, any size. You're welcome to use our platform. And we provide practical elements of doing business in Asia, such as sourcing, but also strategic level of advisory, consulting, and tailored solution. And then we provide the important connections to facilitate such cross-border collaborations, along with essential cultural expertise. And finally, we have our Capital Plus portfolio, where mainly the assistance is provided to startups and scale-ups to succeed in a structured way. So we also hold regular events to share insights and latest trends, industrial knowledge, and practices, especially recently. Now all the countries across the world have been thrown into chaos with the pandemic and also recent political turmoil. So today our topic is rethinking your supply chain strategy. It gives me enormous pleasure to introduce you our very experienced international panel today.
This is our understanding about manufacturing based in the IFM, Institute for Manufacturing in the university. So we take manufacturing as the whole value creation process from idea generation towards the customer. So that's our interpretation about manufacturing is a big manufacturing. During the globalization, however, the core part of the manufacturing, the factory plants, will be extended in 2 directions. One is the horizontal geographic expansion. Multinational corporations put factory in different countries to form internationally dispersed factory networks. Another one is a vertical, is a ownership expansion. It's a cross firm boundary towards the outsourcing and form a supply chain. And horizontal part, the main purpose for internationalization of your business is to try to get strategic resources and the markets and achieve efficiency and pursuing more capability for multinational corporations. For outsourcing, people talk about high efficiency, reduce costs, increase flexibility, reduce complexity of your operations, and also encouraging innovation. So from that perspective, if we extend our factory-based networks along the manufacturing whole chain, we then will have a 3-dimension model. That means we got the core parts of the manufacturing value creation process. At the same time, geographically, we extend that, disperse different stages, R&D or design or production in different countries. And at the same time, perhaps we need to collaborate with other companies like local Chinese companies, suppliers, distributors, and so on and so forth. And then we can see the three dimension model here. But the core parts of the manufacturing is we got established the value creation system which can deliver the product and the service. This has been taught for many, many years in supply chain management, operations management. The current challenge, perhaps, is the whole assumption is we got to establish supply networks. We need to improve its efficiency. We need to have its robustness, Six Sigma, to guarantee the quality is good. We also need to cope change. We need to have a resilience. However, in an extremely circumstance, you can imagine currently a sudden attack from nowhere, coronavirus or flood or emerging technology, our existing established supply chain become useless. We need to have a complete new product. We need to reconfigure our new supply chain. So from that perspective, how could we very quickly transform or reconfigure our supply networks from nowhere, from very fragmented resources, reorganize it into a new effective supply networks? So that's the new challenge in the whole academic world and the industry are facing. So from that perspective, existing theory, lack of the new part of the supply chain development, that new part is the underneath of the supply chain as a foundation. We need a social network, we need a resources pool underneath. That resources pool provides comprehensive resources, but belongs to other company, other institution, organizations. But how could we, based on the new challenge, new demand, to integrate those fragmented resources to form a new supply chain? So that's become a new challenge. So from this kind of integration or iterative system, we called this as a business ecosystem. This the holistic view of the ecosystem allow us to facing new challenges as a company. How could we appreciate this diversification, specialization, fragmented resources, have a quick response, orchestrate the resources, reconfigure into a supply chain, and iteration and the learning? To get this kind of picture is more and more important. So that's the reason people differentiate the existing supply chain from the business ecosystem. The business ecosystem includes the local resources and the social network parts, and then transform that into high efficient supply networks. Another topic of this today is the China. The China emerged as one of the largest manufacturing nations in the world, become the manufacturing center in the last 40 years. The main changes internally, we think, is domestic reform and open door policy. At the same time, externally, the globalization reconfigured the resources in different worlds. China luckily captured this opportunity. So this globalization provides a huge benefit to China. Caused the Chinese GDP growth significantly in the last 40 years. But the reason we believe perhaps is this kind of a very flexible, quick response, the business ecosystem. Of course, the industrial system is quite robust in China in terms of scale and comprehensiveness. However, the quick response part is quite unique in China, facing different types of requirements and technology upgrading, and to transform the resources into the industry system. However, the dark side of Chinese manufacturing perhaps is the heavy pollutions and some poor quality issues, those kind of things.
What I would like to now is to kick off the panel discussion. In order to look at this whole issue in a holistic way, we would like to start with the global supply chain, looking at how the landscape is shifting and what are the main characteristics of the global value chain. Wolfgang, would you like to start?
With pleasure, Ting. I would like to start with the characteristics to describe what we are talking about, building on what Yongjiang has already said, because he gave that picture. I would like to simplify it a bit and say, when I look at supply chain, I look at 3 dimensions. I look at the activities Yongjiang spoke about, which is from, he called it ideation, I call it design, down to the customer. I think it's down to repurposing. It is everything we build, and which hopefully goes back into the circle or the cycle, which is in fact not really the case. We are wasting 91% of the materials we extract every year. But that's the activity perspective. So we are looking, in fact, at the whole value creation process. And this process varies from industry to industry. And it's very obvious that a supply chain for construction material is not the same as the food supply chain or the supply chain for cars or smartphones. So what we have to keep in mind when we raise those big questions, it is not a plain, straight answer. Every supply chain is different. And by the way, that's on one of my continuous points, it's not a chain, it's a network. Because when you look into supply chains, you realize that you have the first supplier. And that supplier gets raw material from maybe many sources. That supplier's supplies, provides parts, goods, products to several factories. And then the factories don't go to one consumer, they go to different distributors, they go to distribution centers, they go to their own e-commerce channels. So it's a very complex, connected network. And then there is the process perspective, and there we will come to how to manage all that, how to size all that, and use the technology. When it comes to the shifting landscape, there is definitely a geopolitical dimension. We had a bipolar world during the Cold War. After the Cold War and the disintegration of the Soviet Union, we got to a unipolar Pax Americana, which didn't last that long, because with the rise of China, India, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, we got to the multipolar world we know today. And then there is globalization. And globalization for a lot of people is something which goes on, and supply chain goes more and more global, which is not true. About the last 10, 20 years, supply chains become more regional. With the rise of Asia, with the rise of the BRICS, the world becomes more inclusive, and less goods go across the borders. It's in fact the services industry that is growing much faster. So digital trade is in fact the real thing we should talk about, not about the goods trade, because digital trade or services trade is growing 60% faster than the trade in goods. And it has reached a level, if we include the free services, of 50% of the goods. Consider the growth rates and you can see the future. Then people think trade is all about labor costs. It's not. Less than 20% of goods trade is based on labor cost arbitrage. It's much more about investments in intangible assets, in brands, for example. So that's the globalization story we have to think about when we say supply chains leave China. They are leaving China for the last 20 years. But a lot come to China because China is the center of Asia, and we are living the Asian century. That's the biggest market in the world, and you just can't get out there. That's the whole problem with the rhetorics we are facing today. And then there is in the landscape, there is that third dimension, which is the industrial revolution. And that's also a constant process. So, and that's all about leadership. And it becomes so obvious today. The first industrial revolution, with its steam engine and power, created the economic and political power of Great Britain. And the second industrial revolution created the power of the United States. And the third reinforced it with the internet, and we know all the companies who are involved in this. And in the fourth industrial revolution, and that's again a characteristic of the multipolar and the transition phase we are in, is in fact marked by the struggle about leadership in the technology area. And in that context, we have to see the measures taken by the United States in respect to companies like Huawei. So this is how I see the supply chain in 3-dimension, and the landscape as well in 3-dimension.
My understanding, the global globalization reconfiguration of the supply networks is a huge challenge. It's a very, very complex system to reconfigure that. So you mentioned each supply chain is very different, considering different product, different markets. Indeed, it have to be, there is no universal solution for one, optimized one or universal one. And we have to, based on the different industry sectors and different strategic goal, to reconsider those kind of things. Different industry, very interestingly, is quite different. For example, Laura just mentioned in the electronics industry, in the last 20 years or even longer, that's a traditional vertically integrated supply chain has been broken down. The contract manufacturing service provider, EMS, become more and more popular. So that's a whole industry comparing with the automotive industry or petrochemical industry has emerged as internationally dispersed and interfirm collaborated networks. In that networks, some incumbents has disappeared, like Motorola, Nokia, but the others has emerged. They managed themselves transform from a very humble EMS towards the Taiwanese called that's ODM, the original design manufacturer, and even further push towards OBM, the original brand manufacturer. So that's kind of dynamics bring the whole globalization very exciting and interesting.
Okay, so now I would like to sort of kick off the start of the sort of China perspective. As you all know, China is often referred to as the world's factory, given its huge manufacturing base and also, you know, the export processing capabilities since the 1980s when China opened up to the West. However, can China still maintain us for going forward is now really thrown into questions, particularly after this disruption we have seen in January and February when China first, you know, the outbreak happened in China. So my question to the panel is, what does this sort of shift of China's manufacturers' customer base from export to domestic, what does this mean for the manufacturing sectors in China? And then what does that mean for the Western companies with supply chain already deep-rooted in the country? And any best practices?
Yes, you're right. For years, China has been regarded as the world's factory, I think for at least 30 years. And but right now, you know, China is also at the crossroad with a higher wage and a shrinking workforce. So indeed, China is facing the reality that especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, that China is facing the reality that the export is declining. And the manufacturers in China, they are looking for new opportunities to start the domestic demand, to cope with the domestic demand. But what I see here is right now, innovation is playing a very important role in China. Quite a lot of companies, they have upgraded their supply chain and their production to become more agile and flexible, so they can survive or they can further develop themselves. Kingfai is a publicly listed company, and it's a global leader in modified plastics. Modified plastic is basically an intermediate product in the petrochemical industry chain. But when the COVID-19 outbreaks in China at the end of January, Kingfai got calls from customers. They're not their regular customers. They asked them if the Kingfai can provide melt-blown fabric. You know, melt-blown fabric is the key parts in when you produce a mask. Kingfai thought that it is their social responsibility if they have the capability to produce the melt-blown fabric, so they can return to the society. So they started to do so, and I think it's early. It's just in February, in the first week of February, Kingfai has a team. They set up a team, dedicated team to start study the formula, the production process, and to train up the operators. And I think it's just within 2 weeks, Kingfai is able to start producing the melt-blown fabric to support all the local mask manufacturing. Maybe it's time for them to start getting into a new product in place. They decided to enter the PPE market to make masks. And you know how long it takes them to do so? It's just within 10 days. They have because in China, you have quite a lot of equipment and machinery suppliers, and you can find all the necessary materials and components. So within 10 days, Kingfai built up their own mask production line. The company is not like a big, like Kingfai, it's a medium-sized company. They have their own in-house R&D team and dedicated in digital signage and commercial display products. Also in February, you know, a body temperature scan become mandatory in China. If you want to, for all the access control, if you want to go into any public places like a metro station or a company building, you have to go through the body temperature scanner. The traditional way is someone to to have a handheld thermal gun, but it's time wasting and it's not that efficient. So SMDT realized it's a business opportunity, and they should have a more intelligent way to do so. So since the company has the commercial display solution in place, they added the infrared module and the temperature scan software to update their products. And also it's very quickly, it's just in 10 to 12 days, they started building their own new product. It's absolutely a new product development that happened in just 2 weeks. So both cases to show that Chinese companies, whether big or small, they have the ability to adjust themselves. And also thanks to the very, very good supply chain base here in China, they have the suppliers of all components and in terms of software or hardware, so they can deal with those emergencies, and also they can adjust themselves flexibly. So this is my point. It's for someone says, okay, it's right now maybe it's a time to move the factory back to the homeland. It's to leave China. But I would agree with Yongjiang that it's really hard to do so. Just when you think about it, you have the supplier, and the supplier has their own supplier. And also when you think about the market, if you want to launch a market, if you want to promote your products here in China, which is a very big market here, you better stay where it's close to your customers.
I wrote in 2013 a white paper titled China Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow, and I quoted Bruno Saleh, who is a CVA partner, and he said China is moving from an economy where growth was overly reliant on investment and export to one where internal private consumption is booming and one of the key drivers of growth. So that trend is not new. This is what I explained with one dimension of my landscape, which is globalization. This is absolutely not new. But what I would like to point out, yes, China is important, but there are so many important clusters in the world. And there are issues to move supply chain and change supply chains which are not very well known. And there needs to be a lot of education of the population and the governments to get the full picture of supply chain. The times when General Motors and Volkswagen could design and produce most of their parts, they are simply gone. Today, we are in an era of high technology. We have specialists of technologies in Russia, in Taiwan, in Japan, in South Korea, in China, all over the place, in India, in Germany, in France. And all these specialists, if you have a critical mass, build a cluster. And then we are building global supply networks around these clusters. And we have seen it with the Kobe earthquake. We have seen it with the flooding in Thailand. There are different clusters who have different specialities. And so that makes it that hard. And China plays a role in mass manufacturing, but when it comes to, for example, the screens, it's more the glass of iPhones, it's more Korea and Japan. And what we also have to keep in mind with all the discussion about PPE, which I think is extremely emotional and political, and we should be pragmatic and think about how much idle capacity we would have had if we had distributed PPE manufacturing over the world. We would not have much idle capacity, so we would have the same issues that we have now. But I think that the reforms of China, the moving up the value chain, has started a long time ago. And companies live with that. And currently, if you look at these surveys, the Americans are not ready to pick their bags and leave China. The Japanese have launched a package to help Japanese companies to leave China. But what the Japanese companies say, many say, leave China, no thanks. And so it is a world which is extremely complex. And to move in that world, which I have described with the different dimensions, is very, very hard. So China will have its place, others will have its place too. And there will be some movement, and I think that people will build additional capacity, maybe more in Southeast Africa, in Southeast Asia, but the ecosystem has to be there, right?
We just wanted to very quickly, in 5 minutes, and I would like to invite Francesca, particularly talking about how you see the whole sort of ecosystem could change and improve, and then what impact does such changes have on the business models, and how can companies adapt? Francesca.
Thank you. So I think that recognizing we are in a much more digitally enabled world, that starts to change the way in which we need to obviously be able to collaborate with others. And in order to leverage the kinds of ecosystems that Wolfgang has been alluding to, it really comes down to, I think, leadership within companies, how they are thinking about culture and behaviors that will enable them to align with others who have the kinds of specialist expertise from the supply chain perspective, and to be able to leverage these different locations appropriately and expertise within, in order to really make sure that they have greater stability of supply going forward. When I think about the potential of value networks, I mean, network is obviously absolutely key, and for to be able to create value, it's very necessary that that is a network where people can work in a successfully aligned way. Clearly, in a COVID scenario, that only highlights some of the issues, and I thought that was a really interesting point when Wolfgang was talking about you know, that complexity, obviously, of the different parties, and how do we make that work successfully. So I mean, I'd be really interested to hear others' views in terms of how some of these challenges may also be considered. But I you know, one word in terms of vocabulary, which I think is very of its time right now, it's about co-opetition. And so whilst we have organizations in respective industries who naturally are competitors, actually to be able to really truly leverage the effectiveness and efficiencies of supply chains, then co-opetition is a necessary aspect of how they are able to collaborate in the right way, so that there are mutual benefits that can be accrued.
That we're going to finish the sort of discussion, but we were going to address some questions now, and then the panelists can put more thoughts through. So we've got some questions coming through, and do submit some questions through the Q&A. So the first one, what are the opportunities to Europe and under this special period from US and China? Would Wolfgang, you like to address that?
I think it's a great question, and it is, in fact, the right way of thinking about the current situation. It's not about fear and protection and let's say looking after our own turf. It's looking after global opportunities. And three things come to my mind. One is on the geopolitical layer. This is clearly an opportunity for Europe to get closer to China, and we are in fact in a good position due to the Belt and Road. I think that the ties have been prepared and are stronger. So that's the first thing. And Europe has to work its, let's say, Eurasia strategy. I would not even call it Europe-China, it's a Eurasia strategy. And it's not a new topic, but I think we have to put our minds around this. The second is about automation. If we really want to bring back some of the production, which might not be a bad idea in the context of more regionally concentrated supply chains, then we need to think about automation, because China has a very, very strong value proposition, and with the free capacity, with the perspectives on the global economy, we will have free capacity in China and declining prices, and we have to meet that. And the only way to meet that in the developing world is in fact in automation. And then there is another thing which ties a bit into the collaboration, because it is about the holistic view. Europe has to start thinking about Europe as a holistic market. It is the biggest bloc in the world. And there is a region, which is Eastern Europe, which has, in fact, better cost basis. And if we manage it well as Europeans, and I'm a European, though I live in Asia for a very long time, that can be an opportunity to move some manufacturing into Eastern Europe, and China will not be unhappy about it, because China is very much interested in Eastern Europe too. And if you look at the Eastern Axis, you have the airport of Piraeus, so they have already, the Chinese have already built the infrastructure, either via the sea or on the land bridge with trains.
Is what factors or parameters should companies be considering when working out a new supply chain strategy? I would like Yongzhang for you to comment on that.
I think it more depends on several things. I think that considering the specific industry the company based in is quite important, mainly because if you consider the market change speed is very different. People mentioned innovation clock speed is quite different from industry to industry. That will determine what kind of business model you need to select to match with your strategic goal. And also, where's your strategic target market? Would you like to go to global or just based on the region? Those are also quite important. And then if your industry is a more frequently change, unpredictability is quite high, uncertainty is very high. Perhaps you need to be more flexible, collaborate with the other companies, try to nurture a business ecosystem to cope with this uncertainty. However, on the other hand, if your industry, like petrochemical, is quite stable, the life cycle is relatively long, and then perhaps you are quite a luxury to have a long-term strategy, pursue high efficiency, and then stability. So it depends on the industry settings and your product customers' characteristics, and of course your existing strategy and resources configuration. Take advantage of this and scope your future development picture. That's my understanding.
Yes, indeed. So now we have another questions coming, which is about agricultural processing company. It says, how can we reach out to agricultural processing company without traveling? So I can start just generally, and then see whoever one panelists would like to add. So I think with now the current travel ban, it is indeed impossible for any foreigners to get into China, because you're not allowed to get in actually. And even you do manage to get in, there is a quarantine period. But there are ways you can communicate with them. To start with, you can carry out some research, find out the people you want to contact. Presumably, you know who you want to target, the companies, but hire some on-the-ground expertise to help you. I give you an example. Crayfish has a platform of over 1,000 freelancing individuals. Half of them are based in China, and some of them are available to go to visit companies on behalf of the clients and report back. And also, if you wanted to do that systematic from your end, you can set up, for example, a company digital Chinese digital marketing through setting up a WeChat account, which then helps you to sort of share thought leadership piece information that you can target agricultural processing companies, talk about those issues, and WeChat market is a great way for you to build that credibility and for them to reach you. In China, people can use Zoom, so you can use that, and there's other ways to communicate digitally. Anyone else would like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can quickly chip in. First, a lot of supply chains, food supply chains, are in fact local, at least in the bigger blocks. For me, that thing, I totally agree that Zoom and then the virtual world has advanced with a factor of 10x, and our behavior has changed, and that might help as well. But it makes me think about, again, the collaboration, again, the direction globalization takes, again, the ecosystem approach. I would have loved to see Europe as one country in these pandemics. And in fact, the EU made a big push for that. And goods moved much better than some people thought. It could have been better. So in Europe, in fact, the production is a lot. There's a lot of agricultural production in the south, which goes to the north, to the UK. So that moved. So I think it was better than one could expect. So for me, this is a point of reflection for building supply chains and see whether we can be, because we're always thinking about being self-sufficient in agriculture, but it's just an illusion because we cannot grow everything everywhere. But can we be as a block self-sufficient? So that would be, what is about the North American bloc? What is about the Asian bloc? Can't we do more, again, more multilateralism here and do better next time?
Yes, so talking about next time, I think there's a lot of interest topic to discuss. We have more questions coming, but we ran out of time to cover them. The good news is we do have upcoming podcasts and where we're going to discuss all this in more details with our panel speakers and also more experts to join. We just have some thoughts at the moment with some bullet points there, but if you have suggestions, do send us through. And then, and also keep an update on our events page, but also you can follow us, of course, on social media and also write to us.